Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of She-Hulk. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I love as Jen kind of puts it, this is a wedding episode. She's like, yes, it's the most inconvenient time for there to be a wedding episode in a season, but she's like, yeah, that's weddings in general tend to be like super inconvenient. So she's going to a wedding of a high school friend, Lulu, but they had a falling out. Well, they really lost touch, and now this is an opportunity, but it's like, why are you going to the wedding of someone you were high school friends? Well, we've known since high school, but you haven't really clicked in a while. And even Nikki being like, well, she's like, well, she invited me, you know, you can't really, how do you really say no to being a bridegroom? It's like, bridesmaid, it's like, you just say no. It's like, yeah. But I think it's just because Jen had a lot going into this. One, being able to say no, I get that. Like, I think Jennifer is probably the type of person that kind of has a hard time saying no to stuff. Deja vu, I feel like I've had this exact conversation before. Either way, like, I'm that type of person who's like, it's a thing I've had to struggle and work with. It's kind of saying no to people. So I think there's a little bit of that, but also it's an opportunity with everything that's going on, especially last episode, the whole Titania thing, the whole, like, having to embrace the whole She-Hulk thing. This is her able to be just Jen. I even love the title cards. I do love that they mess with the title cards. I didn't talk about it last episode, but She-Hulk by Titania, and now it's just Jen. They did it in episode 2 as well. I'm blanking on what it was again, but, she was, it was because it was, like, after she had gotten fired from her previous job, so, like, she was in between jobs at the time, so, like, the title card had changed at that moment, too. But for Jen, she shows up as She-Hulk, and it's like, yeah, and then, like, Lulu's like, yeah, you need to tone that down. You're going to show up as She-Hulk, and you're going to make me look, especially because all of my friends are being like, oh my god, look at you, Jen. Your ass looks great. You look amazing. She said, oh, thanks. You look all musky. It's like, yeah, thanks. And it's like, right. The one time she's like, okay, I'll show up as She-Hulk, and I just want to be Jen, and now I'm being told to just be Jen. It's like, make up your mind. It's like, people want me to be She-Hulk when you don't. Like, I'm willing to kind of embrace it a little bit, and now I'm just told to be Jen. So she's like, you know what? I'm going to embrace that. I'm just going to be Jen. But when she's just Jen, what happens at that wedding? She gets relegated to, oh my god, like, oh, get the wrinkles. It almost seems like Lulu probably wasn't always the best of friend to her. It almost feels like that type of friendship where you're like, oh, you were, like, maybe it kind of, we didn't really dive into this episode, but I'm curious, is it going to be a thing that Jennifer will look back on and be like, wow, you actually were kind of a terrible friend, and I didn't really realize that until just now how much of a terrible friend you are. So, but it's just like, yeah, she got relegated to, like, oh my god, like, some people are blah, 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 blah. Can you clean up around her, Jen? It's like, you ask her to be one of your bridesmaids. This is a friend of yours. You might not be as close, but this is a friend. You're like, oh yeah, this is my wedding, and for one, you gotta, I mean, I get it. It's kind of like that bridezilla thing to some extent, I guess. But it's also like, this is your friend. You invited her to the wedding. Now you're telling her to clean up at the wedding. And because I think Jen is because she I think ebbs and flows with her confidence. I think legitimately she doesn't have a lot of confidence in herself, I think, because that's why she kind of appears very like, and I think that's almost like this parallel of like how Jennifer kind of probably internalizes the stuff to kind of make herself, I don't even want to use the word meekish, because I feel like that's so diminutive, like just kind of like using that word, but it's like she doesn't feel as like confident as she does as She-Hulk, because it's like, yeah, I'm strong and powerful, and it's like, yeah, she's good at, like, but it's still like, now that she has this other side of herself that is physically stronger, imposing, and is kind of well loved, and it's like Jen kind of falls to the shadows. That, I think that's kind of what really changed, probably, like, I mean, we didn't spend long, we never really got to know who Jen was before all this. We got one scene with her before she became She-Hulk, and now this is just her life post all that, but it's still like her just being like, no, Jen and She-Hulk are two separate people rather than them being, and I think it's an interesting dynamic comparison to, like, once again, to Bruce, who has to, like, that struggle, her struggle is different. It's just on a, like, daily basis of life. His was kind of like dealing with the monster that you are. You is dealing with the two sides of you and how the public, like, deals with that. I mean, obviously Bruce found his middle ground with being Professor Hulk, but, Jen hasn't quite found that sweet spot yet. But that was just her getting relegated to, like, also ironing out the groomsmen's shirts and stuff. I was like, how you guys suck for that. And Jen's kind of like, okay, cool. And they're like, yeah, you're going to walk down the aisle with Jonathan. And Jonathan ended up being a dog, which is adorable. But it's also like, yeah, like, it's like, oh, everyone else had a +1. They didn't really give her. So it just felt like shady from the very beginning. And so you add in all that. I mean, there's some benefit. She ended up meeting, I'm actually blanking on home dude's name, who actually, like, she clicked with, which I think is nice after, like, that, the dude she met in episode 4 and obviously was at the, court case in episode 5, the muscle guy that, you know, they did their thing. But he liked She-Hulk, but not Jen. She meets a guy this episode who is more willing. Who knows? It might actually be a flip where he's like, oh, I like Jen. I don't care too much for She-Hulk. It's like, she might not, but it seems like he likes Jen and he also likes She-Hulk. So you're like, all right, he seems like he's a pretty good guy. His name isn't John, is it? I don't remember. No, it's Josh, because I remember she was like Joshinson or something like that, when she was kind of getting drunk. I mean, it's like, right, you can't get drunk as She-Hulk, but you sure as hell could get drunk as Jen. And she kind of had every reason. She's like, you know what? I'm going to pay the money at the bar, and I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to dance. Especially because Titania's there. She's like, yo, I know all the trouble she's caused me, and you're acting like it's nothing. It's like, Jen, I know, like, kind of almost being like, oh, you're paranoid. And I love Titania just, like, staring at her, looking so evil. And it's like, oh, you're not even pretending. It's, well, you're pretending to the public, but like Jennifer sees you for who you are. It's like, you're doing this to get back at me. And it is the case. And like, she waited till Jen was vulnerable and throwing up, you know, from drinking, and then like sucker punches her. And I love the whole thing. They're like, really? Like, what's your problem with me? It's like, you are my problem. Like, the fact is, because she's, you know, obviously like she's a hyperbolized version of like an influencer. Like, obviously there's some truth to it, but then obviously like she's very like hyperbolized and over the top. But it is this situation of, yeah, I'm the like, oh, like the pop sensation, not pop sensation, but like I'm the celebrity sensation. I'm the superpowered person. And then you come in and immediately steal all my thunder. Like, and the fact is, and for her, it's like, you didn't even want it. And you don't deserve it. So like, that's why I want to destroy you, because I told you this won't be over. And it's like Jim being like, you know what? I could take you as me, and tries to punch her and misses because she's so drunk. And I love it that she's like, all right, you need to go She-Hulk. She's like, I don't want to. She's like, fine. You know what? I'm going to do it just this once. And she tries it. She's like, oh, I can't do it. I forgot how to do it. It's like, oh my God, this is pathetic. Like, kind of green up. And it's like, okay. And then they do their thing. And I love Chad. DJ Incredible Hulk. I messed it up. DJ Incredible Hulk. And it's like, ready, fight! And then they kind of go to blows a little bit. And didn't expect the fight to end that way. Titania's slipping on some ice and busting her teeth. I was like, that sucks. And she's like, you know what? This wedding sucked anyway. My veneers are messed up. I'm leaving. And I talked about this previously because someone had mentioned it before. Like, Titania and She-Hulk, that's kind of their shtick of like, it's never like an extensive fight. It's like, yeah, quickly taken care of. Like, all right, let's get back to this whole thing. I thought Lulu would have had an issue. Like, oh my God, I told you not to She-Hulk, but you did. She's like, oh my God, She-Hulk's at my wedding. I'm like, dude, what was the problem with her being She-Hulk in the beginning? Like, why'd you make such, you didn't want her to take away from your wedding, but now it's like, oh, all these people are watching, and maybe because it's being videotaped, and it's like, oh my God, this is so cool. Like, this is going to like boot, like, that's why I'm like, you had issues with it before, but now you don't? That's what I'm like so confused by. But I guess you're like, oh, like, I don't want to seem like such a drag if I'm telling Jen to transform back. So she's probably like, you know what? I'm not going to be the stick in the mud who ruins the height of the party. So everyone's kind of enjoying it. But I even love at the very end, the ending credits there, you see Titania getting her teeth fixed. It's like, oh God, that was pretty jacked up. And I just love that she just like walks away, just like, third time you've lost to Jen. I love that. I love you being this recurring villain that just kind of gets your ass handed to you and just like, yeah. And like I said, I like that being their shtick. I'm curious, will it ever be a situation of like they become frenemies? I think that'd be a beautiful relationship if they ended up becoming friends or something. I don't know what their whole, like, I only know that little bit because I heard someone who is more familiar with comic books talk about it. Other than that, I don't know their full dynamic, so I don't know if they've ever become friends in the comic books or not. But I think that's one of those like situations. I will always go back to like Sky High. My girlfriend became my arch enemy. My arch enemy became my best friend. My best friend became my girlfriend. Like, it's almost like that, where it's like, hey, your arch nemesis becomes at least one of your best friends. Obviously, like, Nikki's are like her bestie, you know? So I would love that. And that'd be such an interesting dynamic to have her as a friend, but they'll probably always be like frenemies to some extent. I love frenemies at the very least, which is also interesting timing considering, like, you know, that's the new season, that's the subtitle of this season of Stargirl. So either way, tangents and all that aside. So that all kind of worked out, and Jen, you know, found someone who kind of likes her, and like they're sharing fries at the end. I'm like, is that kind of her favorite food? Because that was the whole thing with a muscle dude that she hooked up with. It's like, oh, you know, maybe we should go split some fries or something. I'm like, oh. I'm like, is that kind of like her go-to food or something? It's just kind of, I wonder, is that like a little thing where you're like, either that's like a Jennifer thing, or I'm like, is that a Tatiana Maslany thing? Of like, oh, maybe they kind of like crept in, like, because sometimes that'll happen where like a show or something or a movie will kind of incorporate a certain aspect of it, the actor, like, into it. So like, I don't know if that's like a Tatiana thing or is that a Jennifer thing. Either way, I think just thought that was kind of a neat through line to kind of bring back the whole fries thing. Thought that was kind of cute at the end, especially with everything like Nikki was trying to tell her about, like she's enjoying her life in the moment and not worrying about all the other stuff, which is interesting to see where that comment comes about. But I love Nikki was like, oh, I get an opportunity to work with Mallory, because Mallory kind of has to cover for Jen while she's away, and she's covering for this guy, the Immortal, which I love. His shtick is like, yeah, I mean, he's like, I don't die. I'm like, I kind of die. But it's like, oh, his way, and once again, I kind of feel him to some extent because I'm not the confrontational person, but Jesus, like, his way to get out of confrontations is just to kill himself. He's like, honestly, it's the best way. I mean, he's like, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. I'm a nice guy. And when you say that, you're like, yeah, but sadly, nice guy nowadays has such a negative connotation. If you go by like YMH standards, you're like, oh, this is a cool guy, you know? You have to say that with quotes. It's like, oh yeah, that's the whole shtick on, like, you know, your mom's house. But it's like that with like nice guys. It's like, oh, nice guys claim to be like, oh, I'm a nice guy. It's like, yeah, but it's like that has, like I said, it has a negative connotation to it. So I'm immediately like, oh, so you're probably not a nice guy. You're probably a dick. God is a dick. Not kind of, he is a dick, because his whole thing is rather to get out of marriages is he ends up killing himself. And like his last marriage he got out of by like, oh, walking into traffic and getting hit by a car. I'm like, wait, you would rather like fake your death than like, I mean, not even fake your death. He's like, I do kind of die. So it's like, you do that just to get out of like the awkward, and like Nikki and Mallory ganging up on him. He's just like, and he panics and just jumps out the window and he lands on the car and just pops out and he just looks up to them and kind of waves and walks away. And it's like, huh. So that's how that works. And so it's not just his, like, he's done this a lot. I guess to be fair, when you've lived a long time, like, of course you're going to be like, oh, you've had all these relationships. He's kind of one of his exes, got pregnant, and she's like, yeah, I'm raising this child on my own. Another, like, there was just a long list. One guy was like, yo, I paid something amount for, like, I don't know, one, like, definitely dropped a lot of money on him, and it's just like, it's not just, you haven't done this once, it's a repeated pattern. This is a pattern of behavior. I'm like, wow. So it's like, okay, and I love Mallory being like, okay, you kind of suck for this. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to have to pay for this. And she's smiling, and he's like, why are you smiling? And she's like, this is fun. I'm like, you're kind of sadistic, Mallory. I love it. It's like, cool. All of you are going to get equally paid out for like all the, you know, everything. But like one was like, no. I was married to him for like 18 years. She was married to him at 3. It's like, yeah, but I had a kid. It's like, oh, okay. So why should you get paid the same as us for your mistake? It's like, wait, you can't say that my son is a mistake. But Nikki handled it like a boss. It's like, okay, you get paid for this amount, like restitution for this, and this. You get an apology. It's going to be 15 seconds with eye contact. And he's like, do we have to really do the eye contact? And she's like, 20 seconds. And he's like, right. I loved each and every one of you. And they're like, okay, here we go again. And it's just like, and he was like, and you can even hear him in the background talking to Nikki like, okay, that was at least 5 seconds right there. I even love the ending credits is him and that ex staring, and she's looking, and like Nikki's got the phone with the timer being like, it says 20 seconds. I love it. It's like, man, you do not like confrontation. I mean, but it's like, he's almost trying to make it seem like, yeah, if you were in my situation and you wouldn't be able, you know, it's kind of like the kind of way to end a marriage. It's like, yeah, it's a lot easier than telling you, like, I emotionally feel nothing from you. In fact, you emotionally suffocate me. It's like, you know, I mean, God forbid how many other women who knows how long he's been an immortal. And once again, I do love that it's just like, cool, you're in this and we don't know what your circumstances are. because you didn't really get to learn about what his circumstances were. And I read up on him a little bit. Obviously, he is someone from the comics. I was actually reading like a little excerpt. One of his, I think it's labeled under weaknesses, is that usually when he comes back to life, he's filled with so much rage. So I think that's such an interesting thing that in this, I mean, because it's like, right, suddenly come back to life, he'd be prone to like anger. So I think it's kind of interesting to make him like this even, like obviously because it's a comedic show, they lean into him being so even-keeled like that. So not wanting confrontation, because it's like one specific character that would constantly calm him down when he came back to life. So I thought that was such an interesting thing. I was like, oh, they didn't even implement that at all in the episode, because he was so even-keeled from what we saw of it, but also just like casually throwing him in there. He labels himself as a mutant, but from what I was looking at, he was it Homo Supreme or something like that? He's like he's like the only of his species technically. Like he kind of considers himself almost like almost like a mutation, like a completely different species than like a Homo sapien. So from what I was reading, he's the only one of his kind, and his healing factor apparently, like if it's a non-fatal wound, it'll heal at a regular rate. Fatal wounds, he'll heal them instantly. So I'm like, wow, you're like on some Deadpool level shit. So I wonder like whose healing factor is stronger. At least when it comes to like straight up death, whose healing factor is better, his or Deadpool's. Either way, just kind of a little bit of research I did on that character. It does seem like he's a mainline continuity 616 character. So, I mean, I don't know if there's any other instances of the character in the multiverse or not. But once again, that's just a quick Google search I was reading. So, I just thought that was interesting, just kind of casually throwing him in there like that. And I don't know if they were going to count him as a mutant or not. Because, once again, he's technically not one, but he'll label himself one as in the comics. So, who knows if they, like, that's another, like, little implication of how they're slowly trickling in more mutants, because they're like, yeah, instead of Miss Marvel being an Inhuman, she's a mutant. So it's like, so maybe that's kind of like just sprinkling them in here and there. So either way, so that ended up being the case. We also learned a little bit more about Mallory. Just all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, she's married, going on 11 years. She also has a son. It's like, well, you have a kid? It's like, yeah, all right, that's enough sharing. So they ended up finding the video, because one of his exes found out about him being live because she saw a video on, was it Intelligentsia, something like that? And it's a site for, I guess, like superhero related stuff. And what was it that Mallory said a very rightfully discouraging thing about this site, because later on stuff you're like, oh, it's one of those sites. And you're like, okay, I see what side of the internet that's on. But basically they looked on it and they found a video about shit. And well, it's a whole bunch of stuff about Jen, about like, oh my, was it hashtag cancel She-Hulk, she should die and stuff like that. You're like, oh wow. And at first I was like, well, what's their reasoning for that? And then I was like, never mind. It's the internet. First and foremost, like, you don't need the internet never needs a reason. There's no justifiable reason. Some of the internet's just like, I hate you for blah, 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 blah. It's like, some sides of the internet can be a dangerous, deadly cesspool that you're just like, yeah, just stay away from those sides of the internet. But I don't know if there's like, which now you're like, okay, so now it's probably going to go and turn into a situation of, oh, like, yeah, you're focused on like the limelight of, oh yeah, people love you, but yeah, there's a subset of people who just hate you for any reason, which I'm like, I don't know if that's, without getting into it, part of me is almost like, I don't know if that's almost like a commentary on any celebrityism, because it's like, right, like, no matter who you are, like, people will kind of like judge you and assume they know you. So that might be the thing of like, I didn't pause to read it. I probably should have, but I don't know if they have like what they consider justifiable reasons, or is it just kind of like your typical like hateful internet bullshit, So if that's just kind of its own thing, which I love that Mallory's like, yeah, don't tell her Jennifer doesn't need all this in her, just let her live her life. And then Nikki immediately is like, yeah, she told me not to tell you, but I'm telling you anyway, so get back to me, don't worry about it, it's all good, And then also we have at the end, the people that are coming after her, the wrecking crew before, like the people they're working for, who try to like steal her DNA and stuff like that. So, and obviously we're getting a peek at, once again, it's understandable. This is larger than the Wrecking Crew. They were just the muscle sent in, but it does seem like there's an entire lab dedicated to this, and they did switch out the needle, so I'm assuming like there was like the bent needle, and I'm assuming it has to do with the guy that she also ran into last episode, one of the dates, where he's the one who immediately was like, "Oh, do you have vibranium?" You're like, "Oh, you're an amazing specimen." You're like, that guy once again seems super weird, so I was like, you'd assume it's got to be him behind all this. We'll ultimately have to wait and see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.